Hello and welcome to this tutorial to help you learn more about building Workbooks reports. In this session, we're starting to look at some commonly used formulae and situations where using them will help you to build better reports. And we're going to focus in this tutorial on something called the if function. Formulae can be used for many purposes, including carrying out calculations, such as additions, subtractions, multiplications, and so on. For example, if you've got a straightforward commission structure, you might multiply the value of the deal by a decimal number to return the amount of commission on each deal, and then add the values up in a summary report to show how much each salesperson has earned. The symbols used for these calculations are just like the ones used on your computer keyboard or in Excel, so hopefully you'll find them familiar. You can use a formula to compare data from a field with data of your choice and return one value if they match and another if they don't. For example, you might want to attribute sales reps to a particular sales territory. So you might say something like, if the sales rep is Bill, then the sales territory is Northern. You can use formulae to reformat data, such as formatting dates to display differently, maybe round decimal values up or down, or change the case of a string of text to upper or lower case, and so on. You can do lots of things with dates, such as calculating the difference in days between two dates, or adding a time period to a date. For example, you might want a report to show you all your contracts that are due to expire in more than 90 days but less than 180 days, so that you can run a renewal outreach program. You can use the concatenation function to join data together, such as displaying a number followed by a percentage symbol. And you can convert data from one type to another, for example converting a number into a string of data. To give you a little bit of background, formulae in Workbooks reports are written using a cut-down selection of MySQL statements. For some of you this might mean something, but for the majority of you it probably doesn't. Rest assured though, there are many similarities with formulae in Excel, and there are lots of resources on the internet to help you if you need them. I'll provide links to a couple of useful sites later. You may hear the formulae being described as clauses, as queries, maybe statements, or functions, and for our purposes this terminology isn't particularly important and it's interchangeable. What is important though, just like in Excel, is that you use the correct syntax when writing your formulae. The majority of our customers never need to build formulae and can use the inbuilt totals and counts and averages and so on that have been covered in other tutorials. But there are three areas that do come up quite frequently. So in this tutorial we'll focus on the if function, which is a type of conditional formula. There's a separate tutorial covering the case function, which is also an example of a conditional formula. And there's a third tutorial covering concat, which is simply short for concatenation or joining two or more things together in a string. We'll have a look at the theory behind each of these and then build a Workbooks report to demonstrate each of them. The if function is something that we all use in our everyday lives, but maybe without noticing. For example, you might check the weather before leaving the house to see if it's raining. If it is, you take an umbrella, but if it isn't, then you don't. What the if function does is check to see whether or not a condition is met. You write it so that it returns a specified value if the condition is met, and a different one if it is not. You start with the word if and an open bracket, and then you enter your test. Using our previous example, this would be, is it raining? Then you use a comma to indicate that you've finished writing your test. The first thing after the comma is the output you want to show if the test is met. So where I've got yes here, for our previous example, it would say take an umbrella. Then you need a comma to indicate that you're moving on to the output you want to see if the test is not met. So for us, it would be leave umbrella at home or something similar. Let's have a look at a more real example. Imagine you want a column on a report that tests whether or not the value of the opportunity is greater than £100,000. And you'd write it something like that. If the answer to the test is yes, the value is more than 100,000, you want to show the words important deal, which you'd write like this. Notice that there are apostrophes around the words to show the system that you want to return a string of text. If the condition is not met, i.e. the opportunity value isn't more than 100,000, don't show anything. To show this in a report, you can use what's called a null function. If you type in the word null with no apostrophes, there won't be anything in that report column for opportunities that aren't worth more than 100,000. Now you have to use exactly the right syntax for this to work. So you'd start with the word if, open a bracket and then select the field in your database that contains the value of the opportunity, which for us is the amount in home currency. Don't worry about knowing what this field name is, because you'll be able to pick this from a list in Workbooks, which I'll show you when we move into the tool. Then you can type in greater than 100,000 followed by a comma. So now you've got your test. Then you enter the text you want to see if the deal is greater than 100,000, which for us is important deal, including the apostrophes. You need to use the comma when you finish specifying what's returned if the condition is met. And now you can finish off with what you want to see if the condition isn't met, which for us is nothing or null. And then you've got to finish off with a closing bracket. You don't have to use uppercase for the word null, but it's vital that in any formula you have equal numbers of opening and closing brackets, or to give them their proper name, parentheses. Let's go into Workbooks to see this within a report. I'm going to assume that you already know enough about reporting to create a details view of opportunities similar to the one that's on the screen at the moment. So I'm simply going to add a calculated column, and if you know the formula and the syntax that you need, you can just start typing it into this second window, the formula window. But if not, notice that there is an add function option underneath. And you can see there are lots of options here. There are things that I've touched on already, things like date and time functions and string functions and so on. But I've already mentioned that the if formula is an example of a conditional function, so I'm going to select that, and it opens up a new pick list for me. And here you can see I've got less than, equal to, all these other options, but I've got the if one towards the bottom. All that's done is put the word if and an opening bracket into my formula window, so do type it in if you feel comfortable with that. Now we need to specify which field we want to test, and for this I'd recommend that you always use the pick list next to add a column. What you see when you use the down arrow, just in the same way as when you add a column to the report generally, is a list of the field labels that you're used to seeing in Workbooks. So if I go and find the amount in home currency, when it drops that into the formula, it's returning to us the underlying database field name of that column rather than just the field label, which is what's needed in the report. The test that we want is to find out whether that value is more than 100,000 or not, so simply use the greater than symbol and enter 100,000, followed by a comma. Notice that you don't put a thousand separator into the figure that you're looking for. Next, I need to tell the formula what is it that I want to see if this test is true, if the value is more than 100,000, and for us it was important deal. Remember to put the apostrophes around the string of text that you want to return, and then use a comma to tell the formula, that's it, that's what I want to see if the criteria is met, and now you can enter what you want to see if it isn't met. And I'm typing in null. As I said earlier, this doesn't have to be in capitals, but personally I prefer to enter things that are MySQL functions in capitals because it makes it easier for me at least to read the formula. That's a personal choice. Remember, you must close off your bracket, and if you don't, when you try to save your formula, you'll get an error message, which I'll show you. And you can see there's a red error message here that says mismatched parentheses. So I will finish that off and save and close. When I refresh the preview, just like adding any column, that calculated column will be over on the far right. I called mine important deals. I'm just going to drag it over so that it's now next to my amount column. I would recommend that, particularly when you're getting used to building formula, you take a few minutes to sense check that they're returning the results that you're looking for. So now that I've got that column next to my amount column, I could maybe sort this in descending order, for example. Okay, so I'm getting the words important deal, and certainly the values that I'm seeing on the screen at the moment are more than 100,000. If I scroll down, here we go, I'm getting nothing at all, null, for values that are less than 100,000. Now that you've got that column in your report, you can use it if you wanted to as a criterion. So if I go to my criteria, add a calculated criteria because it's looking at a calculated column, and I can say important deals is, and then whatever the value I'm looking for. And now I'm just getting the 10 records where the value of the deal is greater than 100,000. That was a relatively simple example, but you can do lots more with if statements, and you can build what we call nested ifs. For example, if we wanted to see something like this, so is the deal value more than 100,000? If it is, then show important deal. Whereas if the deal is more than 50,000 but less than or equal to 100,000, then show large deal. If it's more than 20,000 but less than or equal to 50,000, show medium. If it's less than or equal to 20,000, show small deal. And anything else, show nothing at all. To do that, we'd need to build the formula like this. This first row says that if the amount is more than 100,000, comma, show important deal. Remember those apostrophes, and we've seen this before in a previous formula. Then we've got a row that looks to see if the amount is greater than 50,000 and the amount is less than or equal to 100,000, comma, in which case label it, if you like, large deal. We've got the third row that looks to see if it's greater than 20,000 but less than or equal to 50,000, in which case medium deal, and so on until we get to the bottom where we've got null, and you've seen the use of null previously. Basically what we've done is we're repeatedly testing conditions, and if the first one isn't met, the formula looks at the next row, at the next condition, and if that's met it returns the output, but if not it looks at the next one down, and so on. Remember, it's really important to use the same number of opening and closing brackets, so each time that we've started a new if statement, which always has an opening bracket, we've had to add one at the end of the formula, and we've just shown them here in different colours to try and make them stand out for you. So let's go and apply that formula in Workbooks now. Again, I'm assuming that you know how to get this far in a report, so I'm going to go straight to add a calculated column. And for me, I'm going to just start typing the word if and open my bracket, but I am going to use the add column to help me select the right field value that I want, the amount in home currency. So if that's greater than 100,000, comma, important deal, and another comma. I'm putting the next thing that I'm looking for, that I'm testing, onto a new row. You don't have to, but I find it easier to read the formula if they're split out like this. So for this row, I'm going to copy, it's the same field that I'm testing, so I'm going to copy it and paste it. So if that one's greater than 50,000, and that field, so I'm pasting it in again, is less than or equal to 100,000, then we want that to be called large deal. Then for my next row, you don't have to do this, and this is only a good thing to do if you're confident you haven't got any mistakes. I'm going to copy that entire row and paste it below, and I'm just going to change the variables. So for my next row, if it's greater than 20,000 and less than or equal to 50,000, and then the words that I wanted were just medium deal. Obviously, if there is a mistake in the row that you're copying, you're just multiplying the mistake, so make sure that you're confident that it's right. And then for my final row, I'm going to say if the amount currency in home currency is less than or equal to 20,000, then we'll call that a small deal. And finally, I need to finish off with my null. And we've already talked about the fact that we've got to have the same number of closing brackets or parentheses as we've got opening ones. That's another reason why it's quite helpful to start all of these ifs on a new row, because I can see that I've got 4 rows and therefore I need 4 closing brackets. As always, my column will be over on the right hand side. And again, as a sense check, I'm just going to drag that column over next to the amount in home currency and just have a look. Well, this first row is for 99, just over 99,000, so it is greater than 50,000 but less than 100, so it's been classified as a large deal. Whereas the next row is less than 20,000, so that's a small deal, and so on. Here's a medium one. That's 23,500, so that's greater than my 20 but less than my 50. So it's always worth just doing a sense check. And that's a look at nested if statements. Another instance when the if function is really helpful is when you want to use criteria in a report that look for one value or another. Normally when you apply criteria, they're additive. So for example, you might apply criteria saying find me opportunities worth more than £100,000 that are at stage 4. This would return records that are over 100,000, but only if they're also at stage 4. What if you want to find opportunities that are for more than £100,000 regardless of what stage they're at, as well as finding opportunities at stage 4 regardless of their value? In other words, what you're looking for is a record that meets either one of those criterion or the other. To achieve this, we need to build a conditional formula that looks like this. The formula started in the way that we've already seen, and it tests the value of the opportunity. But instead of adding a comma immediately after the 100,000, we've got an OR, with another test about the stage that the opportunity is achieved, and the comma at the end of that. Then we've asked to return a 1 if either condition is met, and a 0 if neither condition is met. And of course we've finished with the bracket as usual. Once this column's in place, that displays a 1 or a 0 depending on the values in each row, we can use that as what's called a calculated criterion to focus on the records of interest. So let's go into Workbooks to see that in use. Here's exactly the same formula as you've just seen, but with this time within a Workbooks report. So we've got the if the amount in home currency is greater than 100,000 or the opportunity stage name equals stage 4 awaiting order. If either of those is true, give me a 1. If not, return a 0. And in my preview, I moved the column so that it falls between the amount and the stage, the two things that we're testing, just to help give me a sense check of whether what I've written is working or not. You can see we've got some 1s here, and they're next to deals that are certainly worth more than £100,000. And if I scroll down, I've got a 0 because this one's less than 100,000. This one's less than 100,000 too, but I've got a 1. But that's because that one is at stage 4. Now that I've got that column in my report, I can go to the Criteria tab, and like we did before, I can click on Add Calculated Criteria and use the column. I called my column If, but you can call it anything you want. And I'll say I only want to find the ones where either of those conditions is true, so I'm looking for the rows where there's a 1 in the column. So if equals 1. When I refresh my preview, that takes me down to 87 records that fulfill those criteria. And of course, in terms of the report itself, to tidy it up from the viewer's perspective, you can always use the option to hide the if column because it doesn't really make any sense to the viewer. Let's recap what we've covered in this tutorial. The if statement is known as a conditional function because it checks to see whether or not a condition is met and returns one value if the condition is met and another if it isn't. You can use if statements singly, or you can nest multiple ones together. If you are doing that, be careful to ensure that you've matched your opening and closing brackets. Using an if statement is a really good way to apply OR criteria to your report. It's also a good way to count values in summary views, and I didn't actually show you that, but hopefully you can see that if you attribute a 1 to every row you're interested in, you can easily add up all the 1s on a summary view to return a count for you. I mentioned earlier that Workbooks reporting formulae use a cut-down version of MySQL, and there's lots of information out on the web that might be helpful with the syntax of those formulae. Two that I find particularly useful are dev.mysql.com and another one called W3 Schools. So do check those ones out. Thanks for watching this tutorial. I hope you found it useful. Remember, there's lots of information on our knowledge base, and you can find information on reporting by going to workbooks.com/help/reporting.